Alright, so I'm going to go over a little bit about Booleans, since people have been using them even though I haven't mentioned them. I, strictly speaking, didn't mention them because they're kind of awful. And they do really janky stuff to your mesh half the times. If you're one of my students, I'm probably one of the only teachers at Drexel that will ever allow you, or that would ever even consider not harassing you for using Booleans. So here's my general philosophy on them and how I work with them when I use them. So in this case, I just sort of have this face here. I don't really know why I'm using this face as an example, but I am. So my first general rule of Booleans is if you ever need to smooth your model, so if you ever need to go from this low poly version of your model, and hit 3 to smooth it, for the love of God, don't use Booleans. It'll do such bad stuff to your model, it's unbelievable. So this actually might not be... So Boolean union these eyes in, and then I'll smooth it. And this is actually not a horrible example of Booleans. Alright, new plan. Take this cube, and Boolean another cube into it. Like this. I'm going to pretend that for some reason I want this shape. So I'll grab these guys. Right now if I smooth them, they just sort of become spheres. I'm going to mesh Boolean union these guys. Now if I smooth this, you can see it looks kind of like trash. It's really awful. And since the Boolean added a buttload of a lot of n-gons in here, there's really no great way to come back and smooth this. In terms of adding edge loops in, that kind of thing. If you, for some reason, needed the shape for a game model, there is a setting that you could do. If you go to Mesh, Cleanup, and then just check on this Keep Fixed by Tessellation Faces with more than 4 sides. If you apply that, it will, at a bare minimum, get rid of the n-gons. And again, and you can see it actually kind of smooths a little bit better now, kind of, not really. The downside of doing this, since the entire mesh has basically been triangulated except for these faces at the end here, there's really no good way to go back and edit this. If you need to smooth it, add edge... Excuse me. You need to smooth it or add edge loops. So again, if you need to smooth your model, do not put Booleans in it. The other thing to be aware of with Booleans, so I see a lot of people... One of the most common things I see people doing with them is just cutting... if you have a phone jack or something that's supposed to be in your phone kind of deal. I've seen a lot of people when they submit assignments, they'll just make a cylinder, pull it down here, and then just be boom, Boolean difference. That was a questionable example. Alright, and they'll be bam, Boolean difference. And now you do technically have the shape of this phone jack in your model, but again, if you smooth this, you can't really smooth it, and your whole model is filled with n-gons, which pretty much means that any geometry down here is totally unusable. And again, for game models, this is less of a problem. If you need to smooth it, it is bad. I would also highly encourage you to, for this class, not use Booleans, because part of the point of this class is literally to teach you how to model with good topology, which is actually important in terms of editability if you need to come back and modify your thing later. The second everything has a bunch of Booleans in it and is all triangulated, that kind of gets shot to hell. So when you're doing stuff for this class, 99% of the time, you shouldn't use Booleans. You should be cutting this whole out manually by doing something like adding in edge loops, just imagine I'm making that button in the middle of the phone. And you'll see that the insert edge loop tool ends up stopping here because it just doesn't, it tries and it's I don't know what the heck to do with that. But you should be doing something like this for your buttons where you do this, and then circularize this, and then you would just take this, take that face and just extrude it down. And now you have a nice button that does actually smooth properly. If you needed to, you could come back in here and harden this for using it as a smooth model. I'm basically just extruding this in because that's, in my opinion, kind of the easiest way to do this. So you can go back and harden this. And now you have like a legitimate button in your thing. Your model can be smoothed and it's nicer. And then if you ever need to come back in and like edit this for some reason, you have like nice topology lines to do that with. And it's just kind of generally better to work with than Booleans. Pretty much the only time that I ever really use Booleans for stuff is if I'm doing, practically speaking, is if I'm doing something for 3D printing. Like if I'm doing a game asset, I still want things to have nice topology, just as like a personal preference. I think it makes UVing a lot easier, because instead of, if you do a mesh cleanup on this, if you need to come in and UV this, it's going to do really weird stuff with the edges. Like sometimes it doesn't even let you, like if you need to select this whole edge in here, it doesn't allow you to do that because of the way this triangulation worked, this tessellation. So it just makes everything a lot more annoying if you need to click on stuff. Like the second your mesh is triangulated is like the second you literally can't pay me to work on it. I've had people, sometimes I fix files for clients. I do freelance stuff, like freelance 3D modeling, and they'll be like, hey, can you fix this model? I'll be like, send me the model and then I'll let you know. And they send it, I'm like, ooh, this is tessellated. I don't want to work on this. And then I'm just like, sorry guys, I don't do tessellated meshes. I hate them that much. So that, I mean, the fact that you literally cannot pay me to edit a model that has been tessellated should kind of tell you something. I don't know. But yeah, so the only time that I'll really use Booleans is if I'm doing something like 3D printing. So with something actually like this head is like a not terrible example of that. It's like if I had this guy, say here, and I wanted to 3D print this. The general rule for 3D printing is that instead of being a bunch of objects clipping through each other, this should be one single mesh. And I will shamelessly Boolean all of this stuff together right before I'm about to print it. So I'm going to separate these hairs really quick, because for some reason I combine those into one piece. So what I would need to do before I Boolean this, so like what I could do is I'd be like, cool, Boolean union, union, every once in a while it does bad things and it deletes your mesh. If your Boolean ever deletes your mesh, it's usually because there's an issue in your mesh, sometimes. Anyway, I'm gonna pretend that's not happening, but yeah, so if I Boolean this before I smooth the model, you'll notice that when I actually smooth it, like again, these lines in here look absolutely awful. So what I would need to do is actually subdivide this mesh to the density I wanted before I did the Boolean. So if I just go into mesh, smooth, it will add in geometry as if you're pressing the 3 key, but it's actually physically adding in more geometry. So like you can see, so you can see that this is basically the same shape. Ah, I see. That's why I was causing issues. I have things clipping through itself. So it's the same shape. This one is just unsmooth. So like I'm hitting the 1 key right now. This one is smoothed. So again, same shape, just more geometry. If you do things for 3D printing or like game models where you need stuff smooth, this is how you usually have to do it, as opposed to just pressing 3 key. That's more like an animation program thing. So assuming that I liked how this looked, I would then have to just go in, and I'm going to actually subdivide that one more time, maybe do the face again. So once these are all as smooth as I want them to be, then I would go in and do my Boolean, and just like run through and Boolean union all of these guys. And then it's pretty much done. I've subdivided my mesh, I don't need to smooth it anymore. So this is pretty much the last thing that I ever do to a model. So like let's just assume that I actually went and Booleaned all the stuff together. You can see the downside of this is that you pretty much have to work with more topology, and it does slow down your computer pretty aggressively. I've done operations on objects with like 4 million polys in it that I had to bool, and it took 2 hours to complete each bool. I kid you not, it was ridiculous. So anyway, the last thing I usually do, so you can see my bools have left just like a buttload of a lot of n-gons here. So the last thing that I'll usually do is just go through and triangulate all of the seams of that bool, because every once in a while it does cause issues with the slicer, like the program that the 3D printer uses to generate textures. Also, sometimes Booleans get rid of your textures in a questionable fashion. But yeah, so I mean, that's Booleans. I'm going to say pretty much don't use them for this class, but if you can make a good argument about why you used a Boolean compared to just like cutting something out manually, I'd be open to negotiation. But if it's just a matter of like, I don't feel like modeling that button in, I'm being too lazy, that's not a good excuse. If you're smoothing your model, for the love of God, don't use Booleans. So yeah, I hope that helps and makes sense. If you have more questions about Booleans, just let me know, but I've gotten a few people asking, and I've seen people using them in the assignments, so I figured I'd do a quick thing.